watching Fox 35 News Plus, streaming on Fox Local.
Welcome back. Thanks for watching Fox 35 News Plus. I'm Garrett Weimer, and we appreciate you joining us this morning live on Fox Local and on YouTube. Just a few days away now from the start of hurricane season, scheduled to start on June 1st. That would be this coming Sunday. Been a lot of talk about the preparations. Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz holding an event right now with a number of different agencies, the Red Cross, the National Hurricane Center, the Florida National Guard. They've been going strong for a couple of hours now as they walk through a lot of different aspects of hurricane preparation, hurricane response. But I want to play for you a clip where we also hear from the National Hurricane Center, where they are not just talking about the outlook for the upcoming season, talking about some historic trends as well, and also about how some new technology is improving the forecasting when it comes to hurricanes. Take a listen.
The low end of those forecast ranges is about at normal levels, but you can see it's either going to be probably normal to above normal with only a 10% chance of below normal activity.
And last season, was that also
above normal? Yes, across the board, storms, hurricanes, major hurricanes as well. These are the list of the names for the season so far. At this point, I can tell you the next 7 days look quiet as are our tropical weather outlook, so that gets us into June. But the first storm will be Andrea this year. List. In terms of the sort of overall scene setting that's going to happen for the season, we've been in a high activity era now for about the last 30 years, going back to the mid-1990s. And the background conditions that have driven that are warm ocean temperatures or warmer than normal ocean temperatures across the tropical Atlantic, and expected to continue this year, not as warm as last year, which was record breaking, but warm as well this year. Below average vertical wind shear, so less change of wind speed and direction with height, which tends to tear storms apart when they develop. We're not expecting a lot of that this year. More activity across West Africa in terms of rainfall that will result in stronger tropical waves that are the seedling disturbances for most of the hurricanes that develop in the deep tropics, and weaker easterly low-level winds, which all sort of result in an overall favorable environment across the Atlantic being developed region. And it's important to emphasize that the vast majority of the hurricane activity happens in this August, September, October timeframe. In fact, the most vulnerable time for us in South Florida is in that late season, October period. The other big factor this year is we're not expecting El Nino to be present. And El Nino during this active era has served as a way to impede some of these favorable conditions. We're in a neutral phase, and that's expected to continue through the hurricane season. So there really won't be that breaking factor on these overall favorable conditions.
When you say it impact these improved conditions.
They're favorable, yeah. So
favorable conditions, as in if the El Nino is not present, it's more likely storms will be stronger.
Yes. Yeah, more likely there'll be more activity.
Yeah.
So with El Nino tends to increase. No, yes.
I don't speak weather.
Yeah.
So.
So when you have El Nino, you tend to have stronger upper level westerly winds across the deep tropics, which impede storm development. That's not going to be present this year. So without that, these other sort of ocean and atmospheric factors will drive the activity for the most part. And that's why we're expecting an above normal season. But again, our message is always that regardless of how much activity there is, everybody in South Florida in particular has to be ready every year. We're vulnerable the entire hurricane season, all the way from June through November. And as I mentioned, even late in the season is some of our highest risk. To show some demonstration of our forecast improvements over the years, what you're looking at on the left is our average track forecast error by decade. You can see very steady progress over the last 30 to 40 years. Our average track forecast error now is less than 200 miles out 5 days in advance. Compare that to 25 years ago, it was almost 300 to 400 miles. But the big story is on the right-hand side. You can see this is our intensity error. How strong are the storms going to be? You can see very little progress was made from the 1970s through the 2000s. But in the last 15 to 20 years, we've made significant improvements in improving our intensity forecasts of storms, as I mentioned, about improved modeling, improved ability to forecast rapid strengthening. You can see at 3 days out, our average intensity error now is down to about 10 miles per hour, whereas 20 years ago it was 20 to 25 miles per hour. So significant improvements have been made there. Here's an example. This is Helen last year that went from a 35 mile per hour disturbance, not even a tropical depression yet, to a Category 4 hurricane in 84 hours. This was one of the most aggressive intensity forecasts the Hurricane Center has ever made. It was the first time we had forecast the system on the left, which wasn't even a tropical depression, to become a major hurricane within that, actually in this case, within about 3 days. And so that's what I talk about. We're able now to anticipate some of these rapid changes. This is a forecast we never would have made 5 or 10 years ago. We would have probably forecast a strong tropical storm or maybe something that was right at hurricane intensity. Rob can testify to that too, and Gus. We now have tools that enable us to make a lot more aggressive forecasts.
Now with the funding being cut, do you still have those tools?
Those tools as they exist now continue to, yeah, we still have the tools we have. We just need to make sure that we continue to make improvements because as this graph shows, we're not perfect. When we have rapid intensification now, our 1-day forecast error is off by about 15 to 20 miles per hour.
That's a lot.
But 15 years ago, we were off by 30 miles per hour. So we've cut that about 40, 45%, but still a lot of room to improve.
And that's really directly because of the investments that have been made over time.
Absolutely. Hurricane Hunter aircraft, getting observations into the storm, getting those observations into the forecast models like HWRF and HAVS have really paid dividends. So what we're doing new for 2025 at the Hurricane Center, this is actually something continued from last year. We had an experimental version of our cone graphic that shows the inland tropical storm and hurricane watches and warnings. We're very glad we had that last year because this is an example from Helen where you can see almost the entire state of Florida covered by tropical storm or hurricane warnings, well into Georgia and the Western Carolinas. This will continue in experimental form this year to, again, gather comments and feedback and be able to make improvements to that. Rip current risk. We're going to debut a rip current risk viewer map on hurricanes.gov this year to help highlight the risk of rip currents associated with tropical storms and hurricanes. These are forecasts that come out of local National Weather Service offices like the one here in Miami, but this is a way to have a sort of a national to regional view of that. And Florida has had the most hurricane rip current related fatalities of any other state going back to 2013, almost 20. Talking about lead time and
It says people are going.
largely, and one of the biggest threats is storms that are well off the East Coast, maybe 1,000 miles away, generating dangerous ocean conditions on an otherwise nice day to go to the beach locally. But that's why there's warning flags and swim near lifeguards, and we put out these rip current forecasts to make really trying to do a better job of raising that awareness. Speaking of lead times, so we introduced this concept of what we call potential tropical cyclones back in 2017, and allows us to get forecasts and warnings out for systems like Helen that were not even yet a tropical depression, but could bring hazards within 2 or 3 days to land areas. So this year, we're going to extend that lead time for those out to 72 hours in advance for high confidence of significant wind and storm surge impacts to land areas. So we'll be able to get that forecast information out even sooner. And then I do want to finally touch on post-storm heat risk. We're working with our partners at the Weather Prediction Center to highlight areas at risk of heat impacts after a storm. So we're going to be working with them to identify areas where there could be power loss by looking at our probabilities of getting strong winds and then overlaying that with the heat risk mapping that the Weather Prediction Center provides and see where those intersect so that before a storm happens, we can start highlighting, okay, after the storm, there's going to be the potential for significant heat in this area where there could be loss of power and loss of air conditioning to try to get that post-storm town.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed that within our recent hurricanes, we've had cyclones in neighborhoods. Tornadoes,
yes.
Tornadoes,
Yes.
not cyclones, tornadoes in neighborhoods that sort of came out of nowhere. And I don't recall maybe conventional storms.
Yeah, Milton in particular was a prolific producer of tornadoes. And almost every hurricane, when it makes landfall, has the potential for tornadoes to form, especially out away from the center and those outer rain bands. You may touch on this a little bit, Rob, in your talk, but Milton unfortunately had a real potent combination of ingredients that came together that resulted in a very large tornado outbreak over the southern part of the Florida Peninsula and resulted in fatalities up in St. Lucie County. And there were unusually strong and long track tornadoes for hurricane associated systems. That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much. Any more questions?
Well, that and this is South Florida, so it should all be purple and dark red.
Well, to be fair, the heat risk is really localized. So what triggers a high level of heat risk in Florida will be different than what happens in Minnesota. So it is sort of tuned to the climatology of the area relative to the heat that people.
It is, but if we're dealing with
Power
COVID and we
outages,
have
yes,
no power,
Absolutely.
then we're dealing with, it's 90 outside and it's also 90 inside. So
That's right.
we're all purple.
Yeah, and that's what we're trying to look at here is how to intersect the power risk with the heat. So.
A lot of interesting information, especially when they're talking about some of those trends and also how the forecasting is changing. Some helpful information there. I should note that if you missed our Fox 35 Storm Team Hurricane Season Preview special that aired on Monday, you can watch that full thing right now on Fox Local and fox35orlando.com. A lot of great information and inside looks there. Some ways to help you prepare if you have questions about that. So you can find that right now online.